Good day, and let me share with you something interesting. I just finished having our weekly Torah portion study class with our Learning Channel members, and this particular class was dealing with the Red Heifer, and I thought it was quite interesting. And today is Independence Day, and one of my students suggested that, this is a good class for Independence Day on the Red Heifer because the Red Heifer talks about our independence from sin. I thought, it is. So I want to share with you my Independence Day study today on the Red Heifer. In Numbers 19:2, it tells us, "This is the ordinance of the law which the Lord hath commanded, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring thee a red heifer without blemish, without spot." Now, the purpose of the red heifer was to provide an atonement or purification for having come in contact with a dead body. One of the most severe severe violations spiritual violations that could take place is coming in contact with a dead body, because death is the total opposite of God. When God created Adam was supposed to live forever. The body was not supposed to die. It's when Adam and Eve sinned that the body became corrupted and started to die. So death was brought in by sin. And that's why coming in contact with a dead body is considered one of the furthest violations. One of the things that separates you totally from God is death. And one needs to be purified. And the way they were purified, if someone had a dead relative and they had to touch that body to clean it and prepare it for burial, they had to go through a ritual of being sprinkled with the ashes and spring water from the pool of Siloam, springs of Siloam, to be purified for having touched a dead body. And this was always, the ashes and the water were always kept ready for whenever there was a need for purification. The priest, every time they sacrificed an animal, they had to be purified with the sprinkling of the ashes of the red heifer. And yet, this law, it says, this is the ordinance of the law. The word ordinance is kakak. Kakak, or kakim in the plural form, put in connection with the law, ordinance of the law of Torah, suggests that this is the ultimate decree of God, one of the most important decrees of God. Well, that's something that the Jews wondered about. Why was it so important? And there is nothing more mysterious to the Jewish mind, difficult to interpret and understand than the decree of the Torah for what's called the Parah Adamah, the red heifer, which was used for the ritual purification of coming in contact with the dead. There have only been 9 heifers, red heifers, throughout the history of Israel. And it's taught that there's only going to be one more. And that's going to be brought by the Messiah. When the Messiah comes, he will offer the last sacrifice of the red heifer. And yet, they don't understand. Even King Solomon was said to have scratched his head over this decree. In Ecclesiastes 7:23, he said, "I have said I would become wise, but I'm far from me." The wisest man in the world, and he still couldn't figure out the mystery of the red heifer. And there's a number of mysteries involved. Number one, The ashes of the red heifer was to remove the most severe of all impurities, which is death, coming in contact with the dead. Yet those involved in the preparation would become ritually impure themselves. Now that's okay when they're touching a dead body of a sacrifice for sin and other things, because, they would use the ashes of the red heifer to purify themselves. But it doesn't make sense. Are you going to use the very thing that's making you impure, you're going to use to make yourself pure? That's contradictory. They can't understand that. They couldn't put it together. The other thing, the red heifer had to be red. Red was the symbol of sin. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Red for the heifer? Red for an atonement of sin? That didn't make any sense, because this red heifer had to be without blemish, without spot. It had to be perfect. And then it's red, covered in sin. I couldn't figure that one out either. It was supposed to be a female, couldn't be a male. She couldn't have any boyfriends. And it was never to do any work. It never have a yoke placed on its back. Never made it. And then it had to be slaughtered outside the holy city of Jerusalem, within sight of the temple. All sacrifices were sacrificed in the courtyard of the temple. But this special sacrifice could not be sacrificed in the courtyard. It had to be outside the holy city of Jerusalem, but within sight of the temple. And not only that, they had to take the blood of this red heifer into the city, into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, and sprinkled in the Holy of Holies. Why are you sprinkling the blood of a sacrifice in the Holy of Holies of all things? He didn't do that with any sacrifice. And then the high priest, only the high priest could slaughter the red heifer. And he had to do it wearing the same garments that he wore for Yom Kippur on the Day of Atonement when he entered the Holy of Holies. That didn't make any sense either. He slaughters making himself ritually impure, dressed in the garments for entering the Holy of Holies. He couldn't figure that one out either. And then there's two components, the purification. One, the mixing of the ashes with the water from the pool of Siloam, or the springs of Siloam. Well, the ashes represented the fire, and the ashes going up to heaven. It represents ascending, as the fire burns and the ashes ascend into the sky, going up. Water represents descension, water descending from the clouds to the earth. And that didn't make any sense. Either you're going up or you're going down, but you can't do both of them at the same time. Can you? No. Contradictory. Real mystery. Not even Solomon could figure that one out. Well, I'm a Christian, okay? And I look at this from a Christian standpoint. The Torah had three categories of laws. The Edukot laws, which were events of the past, like the Passover, the Sukkoth. They had no problem following that law. They understood it. And then you had the Mishpatim. The Mishpatim, they were interpersonal laws. Love your neighbor as yourself. How to treat a slave. How to relate to foreigners. That makes sense. You want to get along with everybody. And these laws help you get along with everybody. But then you had the laws, or the Hakims. The Hakims were decrees that didn't make any sense. In fact, the word itself suggests something that's meaningless. when I was a student at Moody Bible Institute, very conservative school, fundamentalist school. We weren't allowed to go to movies, drink, smoke, dance, none of those horrible, sinful things. And we couldn't, it was back in the day when people wore, men had the long hair. And of course we weren't allowed to have long hair. If the hair touched our collar, we'd be sent right to the dean's office. I remember one time the dean caught me and get a haircut, have it done in 24 hours. So I went to the barber and I said, just cut it enough so that you, I, and the dean knows, or you and I know I've had a haircut. I found myself back at the barber the next day saying, cut it so that you, I, and the dean knows I've had a haircut. Very picky, and when they get picky like that, around Moody we always say it was, get your hair cut. And we'd respond, kaka, chunk. Actually, we'd give it a CH sound. Get a haircut, chunk. Movie The Cross of the Switchblade came out. We tried to get permission to go see it. We weren't allowed to see the movie The Cross of the Switchblade in the theater. Walked around, chunk. In other words, doesn't make sense. Give us some understanding, some meaning here. In fact, the Talmud has a saying, which you probably heard on Fiddler on the Roof. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if we could just understand? As Tavia said, would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I had just a little wealth? And the idea is if you can't appreciate a law unless you understand it. If Congress passes a law and nobody understands it, you're not going to be very motivated to keep that law. You're going to rebel. You're going to protest. Get that law changed. Or at least tell us what it means and what the purpose is. And classic Judaism simply teaches that, if someone questions them, they simply are to state that we do all the commands of God, not because we understand them, but because they are simply God's will, whether they make sense to us or not. Is it true? This doesn't make any sense. Well, let's look at it from a Christian standpoint. Myself as a Christian. My apologies to Jews who might be listening. I know it might sound a little anathema to you, but I am a Christian after all. I believe Jesus Christ was the Messiah. And I think Jesus, it's the Midrash teaches that God did reveal to one person the mysteries of the red heifer, and that was to Moses. He did that simply because it can't be said that mortal man cannot understand this law, because Moses did. So if Moses could understand, maybe Jesus will help us understand, if we understand the role that Jesus played. You see, Jesus came to earth as the Messiah. Now, the ashes of the red heifer had to remove the most severe penalty of all, that's coming in contact with death. And that's what Jesus did when he died on the cross. He removed that penalty of death from us. But the ones who prepared the red heifer themselves became impure. This brings us to the next point. The red heifer had to be red, sin. Jesus came to earth as pure, spotless, without blemish, without spot. And yet when he went to the cross, as Paul said, he became sin for us. He became sin, he became red, and took on the sin of the world, which would explain why a red heifer who purifies impurities was supposed to be red, a symbol of Jesus Christ, who was pure, spotless, without blemish, without spot, yet became sin for us. It had to be a female. A heifer, was a female. She couldn't have any boyfriends. Could not mate with another, with a bull. Uh, why a female? In fact, they even thought they had one cow that was red and perfect and all that, but it was a male. And the rabbi said, cannot be, has to be female. And, well, the sin nature was passed on by Adam. And Jesus came to earth. He was conceived through the Holy Spirit, not through any relationship that Joseph had with Mary. Mary was a virgin. She gave birth to Jesus, who came into this world sinless, came into the world through a female without the help of a male, and therefore was able to come into the world sinless. It says he had to be slaughtered outside the holy city, inside of the temple. And we all know where Jesus died, on a cross, outside the holy city, within sight of the holy temple. The high priest had to slaughter, wearing the garments that he wore on Yom Kippur for the service in the Holy of Holies. Well, Jesus himself is our high priest. He was the high priest who voluntarily went to the cross, died on the cross. We take a little further and say it was really the high priest who ordered the death of Jesus, convinced the Roman government to put Jesus on the cross. And then, what did that do? It was our atonement. What happened in the Holy of Holies when Jesus died? The veil split. There was no Ark of the Covenant in there because that was lost at the loss of the first temple. But the Midrash teaches the Holy of Holies. Then there are two components: the ashes rising and the water coming down. Is that not what Jesus did? Came from heaven, came down from heaven, and through his death and sacrifice rose. But when he did rise, here's the key: he rose in a new body. You see, the sages teach that the first man, Adam, was meant to live forever, but because of sin, there was that separation. They also teach that at Mount Sinai, when God gave the Torah, all the Jews were again received their connection with God. They would have literally lived forever, if not 40 days later, having sinned with the golden calf. And as a result of that sin, they lost that connection once more, and the element of sin again entered. And so you need the calf to remove that element of the sin. It even gives a little parable in the Midrash about a maid whose child dirtied the royal palace. The king declared, "Let the mother come and clean up her child's filth." By the same token, God said, "Let the heifer alone atone for the deed of the calf." The heifer was meant to be an atonement, and that's exactly what Jesus did when he died on the cross. Our imperfections, imperfect relationship with God is in this physical body is what brings about death. And physical death comes from this body. This body is what encompasses the Yetzer Hara, what we call it the sin nature. And so contact with death is the most severe form of spiritual impurity, which can only be mitigated through the death of the red heifer. And this is something, I'm not saying this, this is coming right from the Midrash, Jewish work. And it says, there will come a day when the original bond between man and God will once more be restored. This is what the prophets promised. And we will then be immune to disruption by sin, since God will slaughter the inclination of evil, the Yetzer Hara, the natural sin in the heart of every man, and remove the spirit of impurity from the earth, and death will cease forever. Isn't that exactly what the book of Revelation says? Death will be no more. Jesus Christ, when he died in that corrupted body that became corrupted because of our sin, something else happened. He rose again in another physical body. This time the body was not corruptible, was not sinful. The sin of man had already been destroyed. He was the first to have that new body. Just as we, when this old body dies, the sinful inclination, the Yetzer Hara, the sin nature will die. Our spirits will be joined with Jesus Christ, and he will give us a new body that doesn't have that natural sin in it, that inclination to sin. It will be that perfect body that will live forever. Well, there's one other thing about Red Heifer, and you probably hear about it every so often, especially, I'm not a teacher of prophecy. That's not my real, I would just say, my real forte. But there is the teaching, the belief that when the red heifer returns, well, in Judaism, it's taught that the 10th red heifer will be brought. It will be the Messiah who will prepare the 10th red heifer. That's found in the Mishnah, Parah Adamah 3:5. So we can't really have the 10th red heifer without the Messiah. And many Christians who follow pre-tribulation, pre-mill belief is that when the temple's restored, that's when Jesus will return. The temple can't be restored without having a red heifer. And so you can go online now. It's called the Temple Institute. They're trying very hard to rebuild this temple, and they have everything in place ready for the temple to be built. They're even training children that they've genetically through DNA determined are of a priestly line, and they're being trained now, being set aside, prepared as priests for when the temple's rebuilt. And of course they realize they need a red heifer, and so they've been trying very hard to have a red heifer. In fact, they're trying to produce a red heifer genetically, which many disagree with. It's got to be miraculous. It's got to come from God. You can't force the return of the Messiah by creating your own red heifer, but they are just still looking for red heifers coming through a natural means. And there's a video on YouTube right now taken last month, an update on June 2020 of 2 red heifers that are being closely guarded, closely watched, have already passed a close inspection of the priest or of the rabbis. And this month in July, the rabbi's coming again to reaffirm or find some fault or blemish with these 2 animals, to either declare whether they're good candidates or not. And if they are continued as good candidates, they expect to carry on the ritual that will create the ashes of the red heifer, so that when the temple is restored, they can dedicate it properly with the ashes of the red heifer. There's one drawback. It is taught that the ashes from the former red heifer had to be mixed with the ashes of the next red heifer. And of course, that's been lost for 2,000 years. It was thought destroyed when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Except they made a discovery when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there was a scroll called the Copper Scrolls. And the Copper Scrolls told of the existence of scrolls and temple treasures, as well as a jar of ashes from the red heifer. And so there's a major search going on right now. Archaeologists with all their technological instruments and soundings, and they discovered and this copper scroll says it's found in the caves of Qumran. And they search, and they have, through their technical devices, discovered a cavern 50 feet below ground. And the soundings reveal that there is something in the shape of scrolls, as well as other items, man-made items, and even something which appears to be a jar, which they say may be the ashes of the red heifer. And so there's a major search to find that. So for those of you who are of a pre-mill, pre-trib bend, it may be very, very close, or closer than you think, for the return of Jesus. I just offer that for a little extra, what it's worth. For me, I don't live in this world. This world's not my home. I belong to eternity with God. And the only reason I'm here is to fulfill a mission from God. And that is just to let people know of the love of God. And for whatever days I have left on this world, I'm 70 right now, so, it's getting close to that time when, Jesus will call me home. But until he does, my mission here is just to introduce as many people as possible to a God who really loves them with a Raham love. And that is the reason for my existence, my purpose for even living. For me to live as Christ, but to die as gain. Because you know what? I'm living in eternity right now. I've already entered eternal life. I've already entered my home in heaven. I'm just an ambassador out here. My home is heaven, but like an ambassador, I'm living in this foreign country, this foreign world, fulfilling a mission. And once that mission's over with, I'm going home to be with Jesus. But he's with me 24/7 right now. And everything I do, I seek to do is unto him.